from Sire Partners.
Yeah.
And then we've got Matt Rinke, financial advisor, wealth manager at the Stars.
Yeah. That's right. I've been here,
That's
Matt.
right.
I've been hearing a lot about you, brother. Good to
Nice
meet
to
you
meet
finally
you.
here.
Yeah,
And I invited some people from the Sire Equity team as well. They may or may not jump on since it was last minute. So but we probably can get started whenever you are ready.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. I'm gonna do a little hype video for you guys here, which is kind of cool. I think you're gonna like it. So here we go.
Are you telling me that you have a way to defer the tax situation there? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And so the first one I was referring to is a 1031 exchange, which only applies to investment real estate. The second one I'm referring to is called a deferred sales trust.
A real eye opener to see that there are ways that people can use the regulatory framework, if properly structured, to invest 1031 exchange dollars in things that you would not think were like kind to what they exited from. So it was very impressive. I got to say, you are the first one I've seen pull this off, and I'm pretty hesitant to believe in a lot of these kinds of things. So it's a major feat for me to say, wow, this actually really worked, and it was really cool.
1031 is a way to shelter your income when you sell the thing. The DST is a way to avoid the 1031 and not have to suffer the time penalty.
Our career and during different tax periods, we've seen, these tax avoidance, tax minimization, offshore, all these different strategies undertaken to minimize or avoid taxes. And then I can tell you that, some of them are just not worth the trouble. And so I was skeptical. Admittedly, I was skeptical. I thought, oh yeah, here we go, another one of these, right? And then they say, no, it really is different, right? So look more closely. We looked more closely. We had, honestly, 2 years of conversations. 2 years. Now we were being due diligence at the same time that we were doing due diligence, but 2 years is a long time to be, sort of flirting with the idea of and getting to know the people and getting to really understand the transaction. Yeah, long story short, we got comfortable, although we are not tax attorneys, lawyers, or estate planning attorneys, that at least, from an investment perspective, that, it made sense to sell a highly appreciated asset, get liquid, hold that in this type of a deferred or installment sale type of instrument, and then just be in a position then to do the most important thing. I'm probably stealing your next question, which is time. They say, well, you can't make more time. You can. The deferred sales trust, in a way, allows you to lengthen the investment time horizon for those assets after getting liquid, but before having to feel the tax impact. And from an investment manager's perspective, time horizon is the most important element in investing.
All right, everybody. Hey, thank you so much for being here. We're gonna be jam packed. We work in commercial real estate. We try to help people. And at the end of the day, we say that if you're not solving problems, you're probably not making any money. And so to the extent that you can solve problems, you can help your clients create and preserve more wealth or help yourself. And so here at Capital Gains Tax Solutions, we believe that most high net worth individuals and the clients that you work with, they struggle with capital gains tax, and not having a clear plan or a clear solution to solve their problem is the biggest enemy. And you want to have something that's going to help you level up. And so we're going to be talking all about the deferred sales trust, the differences between how it works versus the 1031 exchange, and really privileged to be here, Josh. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to be jamming through this. As you have questions, please do put them in the chat, and then I'll hopefully get to them as we go and or at the very end. And so for those who don't know me, I'm Brett Swartz. I'm founder of Capital Gains Tax Solutions. I'm a commercial real estate broker by trade. I actually started in my career at a place called Marcus and Millichap with Mr. Josh Volan very, very long time ago. And now I just train and coach people and close deals on the deferred sales trust. And so that is a little bit of my background. I'll tell you a little bit more later on that kind of story too as well. But as a legal disclaimer, I'm not a CPA nor a tax attorney, although I do work with one that's really, really smart and came up with the structure and the strategy. I call him the Elon Musk of tax. He's brilliant. He's a CPA and a tax attorney. And so we're not providing legal tax advice. Everyone's really encouraged to seek independent tax, legal, and professional advice. So we're going to talk about just how to help your clients defer capital gains tax using a deferred sales trust and not using a 1031 exchange. By the way, we're not using a Delaware statutory trust here. That often gets confused with the DST. They're both DST acronyms, kind of just randomly worked out that way. And really the other part of this is unlocking capital for millionaires using the deferred sales trust, because it's not just applying to investment real estate. It applies to cryptocurrency, business sales. It applies to primary homes, private or public stock. We'll talk about all that here in a minute. But at the end of the day, this is what we're trying to solve for. We're trying to solve for your clients feeling trapped by capital gains tax. And many are reluctant to sell because they don't have their 1031 lined up. They don't want to be facing the 45-day 180 window. They're seeing cap rates that are maybe still hovering lower than much lower now than interest rates, right? You're seeing that influx there happening. And they're reluctant to sell because of the 30 to 50% capital gains tax. That's state, federal, Obamacare, and depreciation recapture, depending on the asset. And so every single day, high net worth cryptocurrency, primary home, business, stock, and investment real estate owners, they pay hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in capital gains tax, but they don't have to. All right. So who's the deferred sales trust for? It's for you or your investors or your client. And if they happen to have $1 million in net proceeds and at least $1 million gain per transaction. So these are larger deals. Okay. So $1 million net proceeds and $1 million gain. Tyree, I'm going to just mute you there. That is really important, right? Because if it's not big enough, the pain's not big enough, then we find that the ROI doesn't make any sense, right? The return on the investment for the client and to offset our fees, okay? So because there are fees for sure, right? So there's investment real estate, crypto, NFTs, business sales it works for. You can also save a failed 1031 exchange. Important to know that you want to make sure you're working with a qualified intermediary that will accommodate, okay? Not every qualified intermediary wants you to know about this. In fact, if you search it, a lot of the qualified intermediaries have a blog post about their opinion about the legality of it. But it's literally thousands of closes, billions under management, all a dozen no change IRS audits. In fact, in San Diego, the biggest deal ever done was a $125 million deal that was audited, and it's never had any legal finding to change it. It's been perfect so far. But there are qualifying intermediaries that don't want you to know about it for a number of reasons, but we work with those that do. So make sure you're working with one that'll give your client both the 1031 traditional option and the in case it fails, the deferred sales trust. In fact, I had a couple deals recently where people call me and they literally have millions in tax they're about to pay. And they go, Brett, we're at this qualified intermediary. And I said, well, they're typically not going to work with you. And I said, you can try as much as you can. They're like, why would I ever work with them in the future? I'm like, exactly. Don't put yourself in a position where you only have a Delaware and a 1031. You might as well have all three options with the deferred sales trust. So be aware of that. It also works for GP and LP interest, primary homes, private or public stock, carried interest, captive insurance, artwork. Remember, the 1031 exchange only works for investment real estate. It works for none of these other ones, okay? And in fact, the American Bankers Association did a study, and there's about $32 trillion that's going to pass from the baby boomers to the millennials in the next 20 years. And this is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. And it's a lot of our parents, right, that are passing this wealth. And there's about 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. And there's about 77 million in the US alone. And the same study also found that 50% of the total net worth of America is tied to really three asset classes. There's primary homes, investment real estate, and private equity and or businesses. That's 50%. And those are illiquid assets that they want to exit from, but their biggest challenge is capital gains tax and estate tax, which we'll also touch on as well. So first of all, what is a deferred sales trust and why do you need one? Let's talk about what it is. It's just an installment sale. You guys probably know it, and gals probably know it as a seller carryback, where you can carry paper for someone. So if Josh wants to sell a $50 million deal in San Diego, and imagine he owned it free and clear, Josh could tell Steven, hey Steven, put a $10 million down payment, and I'll carry back $40 million. And that $40 million is an installment sale, right? Seller carryback, and that's in a tax deferral state, okay? Now imagine Steven just put $0 down. Now Josh would never do that traditional deal because Steven has no skin in the game. But hypothetically, if he did that and he could get comfortable with that, Josh is in a deferral of that $50 million. He hasn't received any receipt of that. And that's the whole essence of a deferred sales trust. It's just an installment sale, or IRC 453, coupled with the trust. Okay, this trust, a particular business trust. It's not a living trust. By the way, there's thousands of different trusts, guys. So if someone's in a living trust, it has to do with probate and passing it to their heirs, right? The deferred sales trust is like a business trust that essentially allows you to defer tax and in a deferral state. Okay, so why do you need one? Well, first of all, we talked about the tax. That's pretty self-explanatory, 25 to 50%. But it also defers income tax. So if a lot of your clients are in California, like mine are, they want to be able to not have to take income because their income is high and they're a high income tax state. And I'll give you an example of that. We just did a $13 million deal in Chula Vista, and that particular deal was 4 different clients, right? And one of them just paid his tax. The other 3 decided to do deferred sales trust, but they're delaying the income tax because they're all residents of San Diego. And they're just like, yeah, this is great. Not only do I get to defer the capital gains tax, but my income is also high. Can I keep the trust and let it compound and build? And by the way, we're typically building these out at about 5 to 8% return, compounding rate of return on the money, net of our fees. And that compounding rate of return can just build into the trust, and it remains tax deferred, kind of like an IRA, kind of like a 401k. Okay, so that's really important to understand this part. The next thing, again, is to back up to a 1031. Then you can also get a new depreciation schedule. So part of tax flow strategy is to buy real estate and allow the depreciation to offset the cash flow, right? That's one of the best reasons to own commercial real estate. But what happens when you fully depreciate it? They say 27 and a half years on multifamily or 39 commercial, and you're at 0. Well, then that cash flow is going to be taxed. Well, what if you could get a new depreciation schedule and be able to get up to 80% of that depreciation schedule? Well, the answer is the deferred sales trust that allows you to do that. And I think one of the most important things is what's called optimal timing. The ability to not have to suffer the time consequences, like you heard in the video, of a 1031. In other words, our parents taught us to sell high and buy low. They didn't teach us to sell high and buy higher 180 days later. Right, that could be a real challenge. In fact, in 2008, for those who were around at that point, I saw a lot of friends, family, and clients lose half or everything within a 3-year period, basically because they had overpaid for properties in 1031s, made poor decisions because they felt trapped by the tax, had too much debt, and they weren't diversified enough, right? They weren't liquid enough, and they lost it all. And so optimal timing allows you to sell high and buy low, and we call that the Monday morning quarterback. And this is the single story that literally changed it for me forever, because when I first heard it, I said, that's like the Monday morning quarterback where you played the play perfect. In fact, it happened in 2006 where a gentleman sold a $20 million asset in Minnesota by the Minnesota Vikings Stadium. And this guy hates the stock market, loves real estate. He's always done 1031 exchanges. He's worth a couple $100 million at the time. But he's looking around with his 1031 binoculars and he's going, this doesn't make any sense. Like, these deals don't make sense. I'm either going to pay my tax or I'm going to do this deferred sales trust thing that I've never done before. I'm going to take a new strategy here, and I'm just going to wait, because he thought something was going to happen. He didn't think 2008 would be so hard, but he knew something was going to change. And so he did that, and he put it into conservative, diversified investment grade securities, hedged and protected, not subject to huge stock crashes, right? And he did that, and then he waited 5 years, and that bank that previously had the loan with him and then with a new buyer called him up and says, hey, we just foreclosed on the property that you sold 5 years ago, and we're just curious, do you want to buy it back? And he said, well, maybe. What's the price? And they said, well, 60 cents on the dollar. He said, give me a couple days. And within a couple days, he's able to reallocate the investments in the stock market with the trust into a new LLC, and he bought it back at a 40% discount, all tax deferred, right? And of course, not using a 1031. This is 5 years later, and that's the power of the deferred sales trust, which is called optimal timing, which is so important, right, to sell high and buy low. Okay, it also can solve 40% estate tax, which is really powerful, without giving away to charity, without having to buy a bunch of life insurance, without having to do a bunch of gifting. It does take a sale, so it has a third-party buyer and a fair market, sale. But upon that sale, we can change the characteristic of ownership Because how many of us know that the government is attacking owners, right, and business owners and equity, and maybe taking away the 1031 or eliminating the stepped up basis, or all these challenges that are happening? That's the owner. But if you can change the characteristic and become a lender, there's really creative ways to eliminate estate tax, which is really powerful. But you can still run your own deals and still buy properties with that, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But diversification, liquidity, and debt freedom is so important right now. We're really encouraging a lot of our clients to get their powder dry, to pay off debt if they can, and to get on the sidelines and wait for opportunities. Okay, and then also you can raise millions instead of thousands. So if you guys are raising capital for deals, we just did a cryptocurrency sale for a $5 million exit. She had 50 million of Bitcoin, and at 54,000 a coin, we were able to exit 5 million in one day, defer about 1.85 million of tax. So think of it like a way to 1031 capital out of these assets that aren't traditionally 1031able into commercial real estate syndications or business deals, which is really, really great. So my goal is to help you grow your business with the Deferred Sales Trust. By the way, even if you don't have any capital gains tax knowledge or a ton of time, and how to use the Deferred Sales Trust to win new listings today, and also buy-side conversions immediately, because a lot of mom and pops will not sell until you solve this problem. And if you can solve this problem, they're more likely to sell to you, okay? And so, yeah, again, quick background, former multifamily agent at Marcus & Millichap, and I do still specialize in multifamily brokerage here in Sacramento, but the majority is just coaching and closing Deferred Sales Trust deals across the country. But I've done 1031 exchanges, Delaware Statutory Trust, Deferred Sales Trust, and I've had my Series 22 and 63 license before. But it wasn't always that way, guys. I wasn't just, Josh Folan as the all-star, Hall of Famer, just, Leonardo DiCaprio just closing deals. I was one of the guys in the back, right? I knew like nothing. I came in, I was like, oh my gosh, how are these guys closing these huge deals? And I was scratching my head like this was me. Also, my cousin was closing deals too. He was really good. I'll never forget the first check that I was there for the first week. My manager walks by and puts the check on my desk. It's not my check. It was my cousin's check. And it was a $98,000 check. And he was like, Brett, that's going to be you someday, right? Just keep working, keep growing. Like, you're going to be there someday. I was like, wow, it's like the most money I'd seen in my life, right? Especially on one check for one deal that he closed. So I was just trying to figure it out. I was trying to survive. This is 2006. Things were actually pretty hot and pretty good. But how many of you, I don't know if you were around there, something happened, the 2008 crash. So I went from making like a little bit of money just getting the plane off the ground to like dive bombing like zero. And I was like, oh my gosh, but I love the business, wanted to grow, but I was like financially just completely scared, newly married, trying to a baby on the way. And it became like this big, like just stressful financial situation. And so were my clients going through this, right? They were going through something different, right? I mean, they had millions that were, losing, and I was losing like nothing. I had nothing. But I kept persevering. I loved real estate. And so I did what every, I think, good entrepreneur real estate wannabe does. You get a side hustle, right? So you got a side hustle at a place called Cheesecake Factory, my wife and I's favorite restaurant, and we moved with my brother into a small condo. So literally I just was like, I'm going to do a honey badger. Like, we're going to work 70-hour weeks, and I'm going to work at Marcus & Millichap by day, negotiate with banks, try to grow and learn. And by night, I'd work at Cheesecake. I'd wear the same tie, guys. The same tie in cold calling. In those days, we had to wear ties. I would wear that, and that's actually not me, but it was kind of like me. I mean, this guy kind of looks like me, but I had the same tie, and it was like Clark Kent, right? I'd be in my one suit, and I had this, I had my cheesecake suit. At one point, someone's in the other room that I'm trying to get a $3 million listing on. I'm like, oh my gosh, if this guy sees me, like, I'm finished. I was hiding from everyone. Nobody knew this except for like my immediate family and some of my friends, but I didn't tell anyone at Marcus & Millichap. I was just like, oh my gosh, I was just embarrassed, right? Because I didn't want to fail in the business. But I wanted to grow and learn. And this is the point where my manager actually brought in my business partner to speak on the Deferred Sales Trust. And I'm like, what? Like, if this is true, this is Netflix. And what we have is Blockbuster 1031. This can change everything. And so I got all excited and started cold calling people like, oh, I'm gonna start winning all this business. And people were like laughing at me. I had brokers in the same office, in the same room saying, this will never work. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, if it's true, give the clients an option. And but it was tough too, because prices were depressed. So it took a while to get going, but I started getting meetings with people that otherwise would never have met with me. Billionaires, the heads of all the multifamily properties in Sacramento, because they said, if this is true, Brett, we're going to need it someday. But my business started to grow, and my wife and I now, fast forward, 5 kids here in Sacramento, and she's been able to stay home full time with the kids, which is one of our goals. And now we just coach and train and teach people all of this. Okay. So after 10 years, I discovered the hard way And hopefully you guys want to learn the easy way. I'm going to try to put as much of my brain into yours right now. Okay. But if you've been struggling, this is probably why. And I call it the perfect storm that's happening right now. We talked about the demographics and the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. That's part of the storm. But also you have all-time highs. Well, before crypto's crashed now. It was all-time highs. It's completely crashed, right? Stock market's declining, and the commercial real estate are at highs, and we're kind of, waiting to see which asset types are going to get hit. But you also have the political challenges as well. A lot of debt in the nation, right? So this is all happening where people are having to either exit or want to exit. And by the way, it's not your fault. Your CPA doesn't know about it, right? My CPA didn't know about this. In fact, I'm still training and teaching them about it, and I'm their client. But most CPAs are looking in, are very conservative, and they're looking backwards versus exit planning, just in general. And again, the 1031 exchange doesn't work for cryptocurrency or other properties or other assets. And if you try to 1031 exchange, the shotgun wedding, 45-day 180 can be a big challenge. And by the way, the inflexible way, I want to touch on the Delaware Statutory Trust. And I call this the what you've been forced to do the past 10 years. The Delaware is typically a big corporation. Very, a lot of them are solid companies like an Inland or Cantor Fitzgerald. But the biggest challenge with them is they have really high fees, a lot of overhead. Okay, in fact, as much as 14% of every dollar is going to the fees and not into the property. And these are illiquid funds. The funds are tied up to typically 7 to 10 years, and it's not diversified, right? You also have an old depreciation schedule with a 1031 because your depreciation travels on a 1031, right? And also typically you have to, sell high and buy higher in the same market. And so these are all some of the challenges with that. Also, there's a thing called 7 deadly sins. You can look that up for the Delaware Statutory Trust. But basically, one of the main ones is typically not value add, right? And value add is how I think a lot of us want to grow our wealth, right, with real estate. But there are some positives, right? They're non-recourse loans, which is cool. They're typically, a lot of them, turnkey, beautiful properties with Class A locations, properties, and tenants and operators, some really solid ones. There's no new management, no new leases, new utilities that you have to do yourself, no new laws or rent controls or all that stuff. I mean, the operator's doing that, right? I call this peaceful mailbox money or sleepy real estate capital, which for some clients is great. In fact, we just did a Delaware last week. We're doing another one this week for a partial part of the Delaware, not the full Delaware, because you can do partial deferred sales trust and partial Delaware. But the only reason we're using Delaware's right now is to solve what's called mortgage over basis. So your debt over your basis is something the deferred sales trust cannot solve for. So we have to use a partial Delaware. Only for investment real estate can we do that to solve that debt over basis. And we typically do that with these zero coupon deals where they have a large tenant like an Amazon or a Ford Motor that's basically guaranteeing the lease, right? And the bank says, that's great. We'll give you like an 85% LTV deal, which means our investors can come in, our clients can come in with a very low down payment to replace that debt, because that's how you solve it. You replace the debt over basis just to the extent you have that, and then you can go into the deferred sales trust with the rest of it, okay? So I'm going to walk you through how to help your clients defer the capital gains tax, not using 1031 exchange, but I want to tell you a few examples first. This is a $48 million deal we just closed about 30 days ago in Las Vegas. Was not the broker on it, but part of the vision is to give you guys these strategies so you can win these deals in markets that you either might not be in or you are in, but you're having a hard time competing with the traditional, CBRE Tradologists or the Marcus and Miller chaps or whatever, right? Because what? Because you're solving the problem. And when you can solve a problem in a way that transforms the way your clients build wealth, you can and should be able to win the listings with my help. This is what we do. So this is a client of mine. In fact, his name is David. They have over 3,000 units, and his partner's name is Jordan. And they've done over $100 million now, 5 transactions with us, okay, in the past year and a half. And they just do every single deal. And they're like, Brett, we wish we'd have found you 3 years ago because we just do all of these deals every year. And they're GP positions, so they're not all 48 million in the DST, but their small positions are going. Their LPs are just paying their tax because they're too small. Although one LP just came in with us, so just know that it's flexible and everyone has to do it. This was Vegas. It was about a 27% tax deferred there. It's another client of ours. His name is Ron. And by the way, you can watch David and Ron on my YouTube channel tell their whole story. And Ron did a $4.2 million sale on a multifamily property, he and his wife. And now this property was rocking and rolling. It was Airbnb, but they're getting to the point where they're in their phase 2 of their life. And they're just like, you know what? We want to retire. We want to be kind of just more passive. We might want to be active in the future, but this deal was just consuming us. And it was such high appreciation in Denver So they found me on a podcast and they called me and we closed in about 30 days and he deferred a lot of tax. He also did a partial Delaware. He had $1 million debt over basis. So this one's a really great case study to watch on my YouTube channel because it shares, how we solved for both of those problems. So that was big. We also just did this one in Colorado Springs, a $5 million exit for a client. Those were $25 million in California. And the biggest thing for them, and by the way, always analogies like on a Rubik's Cube, every client that shows up to your office or on a Zoom or whatever you're meeting with, everyone has a different Rubik's Cube with different colors they're trying to solve for on different ends. And at the end of the day, we're just in the business of trying to get that cube lined up, solve their problems so that it could be their tax flow, it could be their cash flow, it could be their depreciation reschedule, it could be their estate tax, it could be their time and their energy. And so for this client, they're like around 60, but their biggest thing was estate tax. They were like completely disbobbled with their estate tax. All 25 million is inside their taxable estate. And so with the Deferred Sales Trust Plus, there's 2 DSTs, by the way, we were able to eliminate the estate tax out of their taxable estate on this 5 million. But not only that, all of the growth of the 5 million, let's say that 5 million goes to 20 million over their lifetime, that's all outside their taxable estate. And so they had one opportunity to do this at the close of escrow, and we set it up and we deliver. That's important. It's not something you can just transfer in, right? But they don't have to give any away to charity. They don't have to do any life insurance. They don't have to do any gifting. It's just outside because they're changing the characteristic of ownership to a lender, but also something else on top of it. It's what's proprietary, but it's what we can do, okay? I just want to give you that outcome. All right, and this is the deal actually in Chula Vista. Anyone who ever been to Extreme Car Wash? I don't know. They bought this used to be like just a taco stand, and they bought it for like 500 grand. And they told the guy who had the property, "Hey, we'll put you inside the room there where people get their car wash." And so basically they were in it for 4 million guys, and it went to $13 million. And so they had a huge tax up to 40%. Okay, and so they were able to do the Deferred Sales Trust. In fact, I think Josh just met with the clients a couple of weeks back. So if you want to hear about that. So here's another one. We saved to fail 1031 exchange. It goes on and on. Bitcoin sales. Okay, all right. So primary home. Oh yeah, primary home. Don't forget, you have people in La Jolla or wherever, luxury real estate. They can exit primary homes, defer the tax, and put it into commercial real estate, all tax deferred. Okay, pretty cool. So I just did a primary home sale in Palo Alto. All right, so what are the steps? Step 1, map out a wealth plan, right? And form a brand new DST. We work on a conditional basis, by the way. And meaning like if they don't want to use the trust or the deal doesn't close, they owe us nothing, right? But we can map it out and basically kind of give a proposal, right? A proposal, if you were to sell, defer the tax, where can we invest it? Well, the funds can be invested into the stock market. It can be stocks, bonds, mutual funds, hard money lending, commercial real estate, passive or active deals. It can be new business ventures, okay? But we're gonna map out what their vision is and a plan. And typically we're working with a financial advisor, right? And this scenario would be Matt, Rinky, if he wants to join us. And we're all gonna work as a team to try to map this out. By the way, my role is a trustee, if you're wondering. So I'm a third-party unrelated trustee. Then there's a financial advisor, there's the tax attorney, and then there's the client, okay? So we map that out, we form a DST, Matt does a risk tolerance on the client, and we figure out, what are they looking to do with all of that, right? And how do we most tax efficiently grow their wealth? All right, that's step 1. Step 2 is to just transfer the assets to the DST, and then the DST sells the asset. And so when I say that, it depends on the actual asset itself. But let's just say it was in an LLC. It's like an assignment of sale. So I just closed a deal yesterday in Placerville, California. It was a $2.5 million property. And they assigned it basically during escrow, or have an option to assign it. And it only happens at the close of escrow, which we're going to show here in a minute. Okay, so it's like a simultaneous close. But it's even kind of like a 1031 if you think about it. Like when you set 1031s up, you're just basically redirecting the funds to a third party, right? And that's what keeps the tax deferral. Okay, so transfer the assets during escrow. It needs to be prior to the buyer removing all contingencies. Okay, very important. So we want to set this up early. This is why we work on a conditional basis, because a lot of people are finding us 30 days before they close. And it's a very highly emotional state of not only exiting, but family legacy and millions of dollars and new tax deferral strategy. It's part of why I love it. I have 2 degrees and a minor, played basketball in college, and I love the challenge and the opportunity to help somebody like with 10 seconds to go. It's really rewarding to be able to do that. But realize that if they go too far, it's over, right? Meaning the buyers removed all contingencies. So, all right, step number 3. is just to fund the trust. In other words, the funds go to the trust. We have a bank in Irvine mainly that we use. It's a $16 billion kind of commercial real estate bank. And or they just go directly to the financial advisor, typically Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, depending on where and how they're going to be investing the funds. And they receive a promissory note. Remember, they're becoming a lender, right? It's like the bank of, if Josh did it for himself, it's the bank of Josh, or the Volin Bank, who's lending the funds to the trust in exchange for a promissory note. So that promissory note is the asset they have. Josh wouldn't own the trust, because if Josh owned the trust, he just sold it to himself. It'd be taxable. But Josh is the lender. I mean, he's the first position, only position, and that trust only does business with him. Funds are never commingled or any other accounts. He must approve of all investments and movement of the funds, okay? And so that's what he has as security. And again, that security can be the biggest companies in the world that is secured against. It could be his own commercial real estate syndications, passive or active. It can be diversified. It could just sit in the bank with optimal timing. But that's really, at the end of the day, so the achievement is they can enjoy their wealth. They can give more if they want to, but they don't have to. They can invest. They can start a new business venture. They can invest with you, partners. It's very flexible, and are typically structuring these notes in 10-year increments. And every 10 years, you can renew for 10 years, and your kids can step into your shoes. You don't get the stepped up basis because, again, you're not owning the trust. Ownership only happens with stepped up basis only happens with ownership. But realize that you can't have it outside your taxable estate and the stepped up basis. You can only choose one. So you kind of got to pick at a certain point, your net worth is higher than certain amounts, which is 22 million married, 12 million single right now. And the question is, are you trying to solve for the next generation or just for yourself right now, or a little bit of both? And we can do a little combination. But again, it's that a Rubik's Cube. Like, what are they trying to solve for? Do they even know those challenges, right? A lot of people sometimes get confused with a stepped up basis mean I'm tax free. No. You're only capital gains tax free. You're not estate tax free, right? That's completely separate. I'll give you an example of that. Let's say a client's worth 52 million and all 52 million is inside their taxable estate and they're married. Right now, they'd get a 22 million exemption approximately. I think it's 24 a little bit with some inflation. But let's just say there's 30 million left in their taxable estate when they pass away. Well, that's going to be hit with a $12 million estate tax. $12 million, right? Regardless of a stepped up basis. And that estate has to pay it within 6 months, okay? So again, just clarify what you're trying to solve for. Again, 8% net target net of all recurring fees. Our recurring fees are somewhere around 1.5% to 2%, depending on the amount. As the amounts go higher, that does go lower. Okay. You can always, by the way, cash out and just pay your tax if you want to. You don't have to stay in it forever. In fact, we can structure the notes for smaller amounts of time. It doesn't have to be 10 years. But the biggest thing for us is purchasing investment real estate by partnering with the deferred sales trust funds, either active or passive. That's our number one focus for our clients, because we think that's the best way to grow wealth. But they can decide where they want. They can put it all into the stock market if they want to. We just try to bring great opportunities for them to invest in and let them decide. All right. So how does this whole thing work? Josh, are you ready to participate?
Let's do it.
All right. So Josh is selling, let's just say, a $10 million deal. Okay. And to keep it simple, let's just say it had a zero basis. Okay. And it's in California. So we're looking at about just 40% tax. If you're wondering, its state is 13.3, Obamacare 3.8, federal 20, and let's say a little bit of depreciation recapture. So we're going to try to solve for this 40%, which is $4 million. Okay. 4 million. So Josh, he lists the property for sale for 10 million. But Josh, instead of selling directly to a cash buyer where you receive the cash, right, which would trigger this 4 million, Josh, are you okay considering an installment sale?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And why don't we set this trust up right in between? We'll talk to the buyer, ask him to cooperate, just like he would cooperate with a 1031. And by the way, when it says cash buyer, he can get money. It doesn't matter. He can get a loan. It doesn't matter. But we're just not going to finance him, right? We're going to finance the trust. So we're going to, instead of the funds rolling from the cash buyer directly to you, Josh, we're just going to ask him to cooperate. And at the close of escrow, the funds are going to transfer, or even the assets going to transfer to the trust. So that's the first thing. Assets sell to the trust. And then trust turns around and sells it to the cash buyer. Now, Josh, if the trust bought your asset, or anyone bought your asset for 10 million and sold it for 10 million, how much gain does the trust have?
Zero,
right? So there's no tax on that. It established a new basis because it got it for 10, bought it for 10, sold it for 10. Now, Josh, if it gave you a zero down payment, okay, zero down payment. How much constructive receipt have you taken on zero?
0.
Got it. So how much of the 4 million is triggered if you've taken 0 of the 10 million?
Hopefully 0.
You got it. There it is, right? And so Josh gets a promissory note, and we're going to structure it, let's just say at 8% compounding rate of return, but it's on the full 10 million, right? So we're using the government's money. Now, Josh, if the government gave you a 0 interest loan on $4 million and said, Josh, as long as you invest it in commercial real estate or whatever else that's investment purposes, and you live off the interest, when would you want to pay that 0% $4 million loan back?
Never.
Got it. So that's really the simple thing. Most of our clients are structuring these notes with interest-only payments, typically 5 to 6%, okay, payout, and letting the other, let's say, 2 or 3% accrue. Now, that what they do receive is taxable. So let's say Josh is receiving, 5% out. That's going to be taxable, right? That makes sense, right? It's ordinary income tax, right? But let's say he had some cost seg, right, built up with some properties, which we'll do the next level here in a minute. There's ways to offset that cash flow, right, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to pause here. Oh yeah, by the way, cash buyer puts the money into the account. Okay, the 10 million goes into the trust account. Okay, cash buyer takes the property. He's gone. Smoke clears. He gets everything he bargained for. Cash is in the trust. Josh has the promissory note. Funds are sitting at we use a $16 billion bank typically, and Josh starts receiving payments. In the meantime, we need to go invest those funds because we want to make sure and try to get this 8% so it's not eating into the principal, right? But I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any questions on what just happened?
I have a couple clarifying questions, Brett, on this. So, you're saying no stepped up basis. That's clearly on the assets that are in the deferred sales trust. But once you also mentioned there's now new depreciation. Mm-hmm. So when the deferred sales trust buys the asset for $10 million, I take back the promissory note. The deferred sales trust basis is $10 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the deferred sales trust basis is $10 million. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that deferred sales trust, which is out of now my estate, the only thing that's in my estate is the promissory note, correct?
Correct. So
when I pass, my basis does step up, but only on the promissory note.
So there's no step up on it's something that you lend on. There's no step up on that, right? So by definition, a lender is not an owner, right? So the characteristics is different.
Well,
however, I think
so let's say like my estate was $34 million, right? So 24 passes my kids, 10 additional. Mm-hmm. That promissory note's part of my estate though, right?
Yes. Yes. However, it's outside of your taxable estate. So let me clarify. So DST 1.0, which is just a traditional installment sale, that is inside your taxable estate. DST 1.0. There's DST 2.0. That's a little bit different. It's not a 453. It's a different tax code. It's with NDA and I can't say it live here, right? That is outside your taxable estate. There's no limit on that one. So we got to choose which one you want. They have some flexibility. The same price. But yeah, let me also clarify too. By partnering with the trust, I call it lendership. You can partner with the trust to go into new assets, and this is when you get the new depreciation schedule. So at first you're a lender, but you can turn around and form a brand new LLC, Josh, and the trust can be your silent JV partner. So let's walk it through right now. So let's say this is an LLC, and this part you'd get a stepped up basis on because you're the owner of this LLC. But the trust is putting up all the money. So this is the cool part. So Josh is 80% owner to start. This is how we structure it. But Josh puts up $0. This is Josh. Okay, I'll just put a J here. And the trust is a silent joint venture partner that puts up, in this scenario, we can do up to 80% of it. So $8 million here. And by the way, this is the single reason I started this company. Without what I'm about to say right here, I wouldn't even be here, because otherwise it would just be passive into the stock market. But with this right here, you can be active and get a new depreciation schedule and get an ownership again. Okay, so the trust puts up $8 million. Josh, you put up 0, and this LLC, let's just say you go buy a $16 million asset. Okay, and now this asset goes to $32 million over your lifetime, right? Now, we would probably, Josh, you're like, hey, Brett, I've only got a year to go, whatever, right? If you kind of could time this kind of thing, we would probably exit at 32 million and get it outside your taxable estate. But let's just hypothetically you didn't, right? Yeah, this particular asset would get a stepped up basis here, right? Okay. Now, Josh, you put $0 in. I mean, the trust put up the 8 million, and part of that obviously is your money that's owed to you. But we call it the go fund yourself. Instead of having to get a loan from a bank or get other even equity from somebody else, you use what you would have paid to the government, let's just say 4 million of that, right? At 0% to put into this 8 million here as the down payment to buy a $16 million asset to turn it to 32 million. And so upon the exit, oh, by the way, the trust also needs an 8% pref. We got to keep it commercially reasonable. But look at this. You see how we had 8 over here? We mirror that. So it's kind of like you borrowed from yourself. So you have 8% here, 8% here. And so the waterfall will be on the back end. Let's say, you know how many years you owned it for, right? The 8% accruing, you got to pay that back first, plus 20% of the upside. And then Josh keeps 80%. And whatever that turns out to be, you can roll into the trust as well as promissory note number 2. So let's just say hypothetically, 16 to 32. That's another
16.
Another 16. Yeah. So the original 8 goes back in. Plus, let's say the pref was $1 million. So let's say there's 15 left over, Josh. So you could have promissory note number 2 at $15 million. Okay. At 8%. So now you have the original one at 10 million at 8%. Now you have a second one at 15 million. Had you, and by the way, you got the new depreciation schedule on this too, by the way, right? You can only get 80%. We can't give you 100 because it's not commercially reasonable. Does that make sense right there?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I guess, yeah, that makes sense. So I understand the 1.0, 2.0 differentiation on ownership and then the out of the estate side. So 2 more follow-ups on this. What if, just say, the deferred sales trust assets, when the note comes due, right, the assets in the DST are more than the promissory note? That's one. And then clearly the inverse of that, unfortunately, gets aggressive, goes into something else. The 8% is not able to be made whole and, it gets cut in half or whatever. So examples of both, when it's below the amount that comes due and when it's above.
Okay. So yeah, say it's $10 million and we're trying to accrue 8%, right? But it's only producing, let's say 4, right? So it's short. That's the first thing. What would happen at the end of the 10 years? Well, there's no personal guarantee. So none of the funds or the investments are guaranteed, right? So that's all the risk that's involved there. But you wouldn't owe the tax on what you haven't received. There's another way to even think about it. Let's just say it went to 0, right? You put 10 million and, the odds of this happening, because we want to make sure we diversify, very low, but let's just say it did. Well, if you receive 0 on 0, the tax is 0, right, Josh? And to the extent that you do receive back payments, you'll pay tax. On the original principal, the 10 million, you'll pay cap gains tax as you receive principal back. Anything above and beyond that, let's say the 4% was short of the 8, you pay ordinary income tax on. Does that answer that first question on that?
Yeah, I understand. I understand when it goes below. That makes sense to me. It's when, let's say that $10 million is now worth 20.
Okay, yeah.
I got to jump. I got to hop onto something else. But I appreciate the insight. I'm definitely gonna have a few follow-ups. I'd love to connect with you individually, Brett. This is awesome. Really.
I'd love to, Matt. Yeah, thank you so much. Yep, thanks for being here.
Don't keep the tax flowing.
Yeah, keep the tax flowing, working for you. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, let's talk about that, Josh. So 10%, $10 million at 8% compounding, by the way, it's a rule of 72. At about 9 years, that 10 is going to be 20. So do realize that we structure this in a way that we try to make it as favorable and lucrative as it can be. And that's pretty good to be able to do 8% compounding year in and year out, right? So 10 million at 9 years at 8% compounding is 20 million. So you'd have 10 million plus that was originally there, plus the other 10 million that's been compounding that's owed to you.
So
but let's just say,
30.
Exactly. So we go to 30. Let's go to 30, right? So there's an extra 10 million. So yeah, if as a trustee, I've got to be able to make a profit. So a part of it is I'm not related to Josh, right? I'm not related to whoever your client might be. I'm third party, unrelated. So that creates the integrity of the trust itself. That's part of the foundations of it. So part of that is I have to be able to make a profit. I need to be in it for business purpose, which is potentially make a profit and to get the fees along the way. So if it did do that, right, and you didn't renew, we didn't recast the note, okay, to another term, right, with that amount, I would take that profit and I'd be doing backflips. It's not our intention to do that, right? However, there is a way to carve out that upside by purchasing an option, okay? And this is important too. So if you said, you know what, Brett, I think we're going to take this 10 and turn it into 30, and I'd like to participate and get that additional upside. Is there a way to do that? And the answer is yes. You can purchase a one-time option for like a 10-year term to be able to carve out up to 98% of the upside for any active real estate deals you're in. So on that 80-20 on the active LLC that you're buying and running that deal, that 80-20, you can purchase an option to carve out that 90% of that 20, which equals 98% of the upside. So on that $15 million that would have rolled back to the DST, right? It was actually 16, right? We would have had, you would have had 98% of that upside, right? After you pay the 8% pref by purchasing that option. What's the option? Well, the option is 1.5% on whatever amount you want to purchase the option on. So let's just keep it simple. Let's say you put $1 million into an LLC that you wanted to purchase the option on. You'd pay $15,000 in it. So it's an additional fee. We had to make it commercially reasonable. It's about 15 bips for any 10-year term. If you want a 5-year term, you can buy it for half of that. But the key is you're buying it up front, and then you can exercise the option upon the exit to get up to 98% on anything that's active. If it's passive, you can also purchase the option, but we only allow 90% of the upside. So you still got to give up that 10%. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, and the other way you get not around it, but to deal with that is you can renew the term, right? So you can extend it. So how long can you extend the term? God willing, I'm going to live for a long time. I do this, is there a limit on how many options that can be done? And same thing for heirs, right?
There is no limit, right? So at this point, we do keep it 10-year increments, purposely, because you can't make 100. No one's making a commercial reasonable loan for 100 years, but every 10 years is like a refinance, and then your kids can keep doing that too and keep doing that too. So there's nothing that says you can't renew promissory notes.
Okay, perfect. Those were some of my questions. And then just what are the top 3 objections? What are the people on this call going to face as objections? Why people don't do this besides not understanding it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into that right here, right? So, in fact, I don't even have it on this slide. So the number one objection you guys are going to face right now is, man, this sounds too good to be true. Like your clients are worth 5, 10, 50, $100 million, right? And they're saying, Brett, or whoever, Josh, my people would already told me about this. Like, why don't I know about it? And so I want to just tell you 2 deal stories to give you some confidence. And anytime someone comes to you with an objection, they have a logical reason of why, in their mind, a story that is why that's true. And so it's not enough just to provide facts. You got to provide a story to help them overcome that false belief of it's too good to be true. How do we know this thing is legal? And this is the legal story that we tell all the time. There's a gentleman named David Young. In fact, you saw him on the video in the very beginning, at the very end of the video. He said the one who's kind of dancing around for 2 years with this. And so for those who don't know David Young, he's kind of like a Mark Cuban, if you will, of the financial advising world. In fact, he worked with a guy named Bill Gross, and Bill Gross and David Young built up PIMCO, one of the largest, most wealthiest, wealth advisors in the world. Okay, from 80 billion to 1.2 trillion, and you can imagine these guys who manage some of the biggest wealth in the world get approached with a lot of people to pitch their tax thing, right? And they just dismiss it. Like he says, he dismisses a lot of things, offshore things, all this stuff. But he and his team did a 2-year due diligence on this, right? And they had their legal team and everyone look at this, and they came to the conclusion that number one, my business partner, I call him the Elon Musk of tax, that might be the smartest person we've ever met, and that's a lot for guys who've been in the industry for 30 years. And number 2, we're all in. We'll put our name on this, and we'll manage money for all DST clients. And so what we always say to people who are cautious, and they should be cautious, right? Because we're coming with something new, is if it's good enough for David Young and his legal team, after 2 years of due diligence, and he manages some of the biggest wealth in the world, to put his name on it, is it good enough for you and your legal team? And we'll put him right on with David Young. David Young could be a part of the team to manage the money, right? So that's one way to help to overcome the legal thing. It's if you try to get into the tax and it's at 453, I mean, we do that and we'll geek out on that stuff. We're experts in that. I wouldn't approach it that way. I don't want you guys to think you need to be a CPA or a tax attorney. In fact, you don't want to be, because you're opening yourself up to potential liability. You just want to say, hey, look, here's a deal story. Here's a couple other deal stories. Here's the Chula Vista's deal story, right? It's in your backyard or wherever you're at in the country when you're selling real estate. And lean on that legal story of David Young going through it for 2 years. So that's the first story. The second story is a gentleman named Cal Garvin. And whenever you can use real names too, that also really helps. And Cal was actually working at as a financial advisor for 35 years in Los Angeles, and with a group called LPL Advisors, very respected. And Cal is looking to retire from his business practice as a financial advisor. He's one of the top guys in the country. And he gets approached with the Deferred Sales Trust. And for he and his wife, they wanted to retire 10 years earlier. But they had to, post-tax, they needed to work an extra 10 years. But with the Deferred Sales Trust, they could sell and be out today. So he goes home, and unfortunately, his wife was a Treasury attorney. She's like a G4. She's like the top. She's with the government, Secretary of Treasury. And she's really smart, and she has a lot of connections and people. And he goes, honey, he goes, I will never do anything if you say you don't feel comfortable, but if this is true, we can retire today. So would you take this information and go to the people and talk and figure this thing out? And he goes, it was like a movie. Like, have you guys seen that show Suits, where they walk in and it's like Harvey and I think it's Mike, right? And they have like a pile of papers and they put it on the desk. He goes, it's like a movie, right? She came in 2 days later with the pile of paper that I gave to her. She threw it on the desk and she said 2 words that changed our life. She says, it's legit. He goes, that's all I need to hear. I sold my business in the next 90 days and we retired. And I go, Cal, would you come on my podcast and share the story? He goes, no, I don't like to be on the video and stuff, but anyone who wants to call me, I'll talk to them about it. But he goes, tell them this, before they call me, 2 things. Number 1, tell them, do you think my wife and I, after 35 years of my career in the financial advising world, our financial legacy and our retirement, and then hers as a G4 attorney with the Secretary of Treasury and all the stuff she's been through, one of the smartest ladies, do you think we'd put our legacy at risk for something that we didn't think was 100% legal and 100% legit? And that was 16 years ago, right? He goes, so just tell them that. They'll call me. I'll talk to them. So again, if you can learn those stories or rewind these stories, that'll help you to overcome that false objection of too good to be true, and I don't know if it's legal. So that's that one. Let me give you the next one. The next one will be, this seems too expensive, right? Like, gosh, like 1.5% to 2%. Well, first of all, 40% is a big number, right, for tax, especially in California. But you want to learn how to make the deferred sales trust an investment and not an expense. And so to the extent that you can understand if they're trying to solve for estate tax, solve for income tax, solve for a new depreciation schedule, and then the biggest one is optimal timing. That way you can lay out why the deferred sales trust solves all of those problems. And any one of those solutions can actually solve, overcome that objection if it's too expensive, or I don't know if it's worth it. So understand you're like a doctor walking in and you're doing a diagnosis and you're saying, hey, what are your challenges? What are your problems? And how do we solve for that? Josh, how are we doing on time? Do we got to run?
I've got to jump here in a second. My last one, I guess an objection I would hear is control, right? Like we always hear about the control objection.
Yep.
And a lot of people, the reason why they own real estate themselves is they want to have that control, that, decision-making power, and hence why they stay on the merry-go-round of the 1031 exchange. So yep. I would imagine that's what a lot of these people are going to be dealing with, is the control objection and trusting you or someone like you as a trustee. Right. So absolutely. Maybe you can talk about that. I've got to jump and I'll follow up with you, Brett. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. I'll finish on that one, guys. Thanks, Josh. Yep. So let's talk about control, right? So one of the biggest objections with the deferred sales trust is, oh my gosh, I'm giving up all my control or I'm becoming a lender and I'm not an owner anymore. I'm used to running my own deals. Well, the first part of that is remember, lendership, meaning you can be a lender at first and then you can turn around and you become an owner of an LLC and you're running your deals again. Which, by the way, is not unlike what you do with a 1031 exchange. Think about it. You give up control to a 1031 exchange accommodator for a period of time, and then you retake control when you go back into your new deal. Now, in a 1031, it's about 180 days, right? 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. But you already do that. And by the way, if you have an IRA or 401k, you're giving up some control. There's custodians and there's different groups, different companies that are running that. But the key is you must approve of all investments and all movement of funds. Okay. So nothing loses out your approval or your signature, but you do have to give up some control. You don't have what's called unilateral control. So that's absolutely true, right? Meaning that you have to work with the trustee, me, and the promissory note and the structure that we have in place. Otherwise it'd be taxable, right? So that's the first thing. But then again, we'll talk about a deal story. So I have a client, he sold a $2.6 million business in Tennessee, and he wanted to build 72 units in Tennessee. He lives in Alabama now. And he partnered with the trust to go build multifamily units. And so think about that. If you can partner with the trust in an LLC, which you're managing, running, and doing, what is the difference? Well, the difference is you didn't have to go get a bank loan, use the trust funds. By the way, it's not all of your funds, it's the government's funds too, right? So it's a win-win. You're not having to get it from a bank. You're not having to give it to a private investor. You can use it from the trust. At any point too, if the trust is not performing, you can foreclose on the trust and just take your money back. So that's kind of the control part of it, I would say, is the best way to understand that you have to approve of everything. You can partner with the trust, and you can get funds outside your taxable estate, right? You could another way to think about it is you could have all the control and all of the stepped up basis and all of the ownership, but it could all be in your taxable estate unless you've done a bunch of gifting or give it all away to charity. So again, the more you can find the problem, the more you can figure out the deferred sales trust makes sense. Does anyone else have any other questions for me? And if not, no worries. But if you do, unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Steven, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about if you can do sort of like a reverse deferred sales trust. Does it work at all the other way?
So how do you mean when you say reverse? You mean like a reverse 1031 exchange? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like in the sense of, starting with a commercial property and maybe wanting to exchange and defer capital gains tax going into whether it be, crypto, NFTs, whatever, like that direction.
Yeah, so the answer is no with the deferred sales trust. It does take a third-party buyer or a third-party exit paying fair market value for whatever crypto or business or real estate that you're selling. Mm-hmm. And we work on a conditional basis where you won't pay us, we won't get anything until it sells. So the trust gets formed, but the assets don't go into it until it's there. Once it's there, then you can. So yeah, it wouldn't be like a reverse 1031 where you buy something and then reverse back into it. That would be cool. That would be cool if it could, but no, it can't.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question. Good question. Anybody else have any other questions? At the top of the hour and at the top of the hour.
Brett, this is Keon. I work directly with Josh. I appreciate you taking the time today. Learned a lot. I've heard about this before, but to be honest with you, I get a lot of clarification, based on you going over everything in detail. Unfortunately, I'm traveling today, so I'm actually only on the call. I'm not able to see your PowerPoint slide. I was wondering, is there any way you might be able to send some of the slides that better kind of go over what we discussed today to our email?
Yeah, 100%. So we have our slides are good. Also, we have our YouTube channel. So if you guys search Capital Gains Tax Solutions on YouTube and capitalgainstaxsolutions.com for our website, you can also just see the entire replay there. And I'll put that also in the chat. You can if you want to show some love, you should subscribe to the channel there. In fact, we just had Josh on the podcast. He's on there now. He's already becoming a YouTube superstar. I've been trying to get him on video for years, so it's good to have him on there. So yeah, check out the channel for the entire replay, and then happy to share the slides. I think what I'll do is I'll just email Josh, and then you guys can have those.
That's perfect. I appreciate it. And then one additional question. You mentioned that some intermediaries can be challenging to work with. Do you have any national QIs that you can refer that kind of, you work with in the past that has been a little bit more streamlined to work with?
100%. In fact, we work exclusively right now with Exchange Solutions out of San Jose, kind of San Francisco, California. And we don't go anywhere else. And we never will until they don't perform. And they've been amazing, okay? They're experts in everything you need, Delaware, reverse, traditional, and they work with us on a deferred sales trust. So yeah, if you'd like, I'll make an introduction to you guys. Or just let them know you're working with me when you call them. Dua Thompson is over there. Exchange Solutions. I highly, highly recommend that you honestly never send your exchange dollars to anyone else ever again if they don't provide or will accommodate. And it's not even that. A lot of them, by the way, be like, oh yeah, we'll accommodate. Or some of them might say that. Some of them outright say they won't. But if they haven't done it yet, it's going to be a poor experience for your client. So you want to work with those that have all done it. And this is where we're doing it every day. So yeah, that would be the one. And I'm happy to share that with Josh too.
Perfect. Yeah, if you can include that in the email and then just ask them to distribute to all of us, that'd be great. And like I said, I appreciate you taking the time with us. This was very educational.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for being on. Good questions. Anybody else? Perfect. You guys have been amazing. Top of the hour, 9 o'clock. Appreciate everybody. If you want to learn more, go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. Again, look for the book too, by the way, coming out. It's Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank. Anyone seen that show? He's coming in the book. It's going to be really cool. It's called Building a Tax Deferred Exit Strategy. And look for that coming to Amazon. And thank you guys. Appreciate it. And gals. And have a great rest of your day. Look forward to helping everybody.
Thanks, Brett. Have a great day.
Thanks again.